Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us on a Saturday morning. My name is Mary Caballero. I'm the Chief Broadcast Officer for SAG-AFTRA, and we're happy to be able to provide you with a presentation from Judith Matloff this morning. And I'll let Vicki Thomas introduce Judith. This is the second in a series of programs that we've partnered with Columbia University's DART program with, and so I will toss it to Vicki Thomas. Vicki Thomas is a reporter for WWJ-AM in Detroit, Michigan. She's also our shop steward for that station, longtime shop steward and advocate for her colleagues at WWJ. So Vicki, take it away.
All right, well, thank you so much, Mary. Thank you all for joining this morning. This program is made possible through the SAG-AFTRA News and Broadcast Department with funding from the SAG-AFTRA Foundation and in partnership with the Columbia University School of Journalism's DART program. And I just want to let you know that this presentation is being recorded, but for those who really don't want to be part of the recording and they have questions during our Q&A portion of the program, you can hold your questions until that portion because that will not be recorded. Now, during the course of Judith's presentation, if you have a burning desire to ask a question during her presentation, she is encouraging that so that we can have a free flow of dialogue. Just use the participants' hand raise button and we will get to you. Now, I'm really excited about today's workshop because, you know, I've been in some dangerous situations myself, covering some of the daily protests here in the city of Detroit, including one incident where police did use tear gas, and unfortunately I was ill prepared, but I'll share more about that during the Q&A portion. But just to let you know, as of September 21st, there have been 825 reported aggressions against journalists across the country, including 109 arrests, 203 physical attacks, including more than 75 by law enforcement, 99 tear gassings, 61 pepper sprayings, 194 rubber bullets used, among others. So this 90-minute workshop will cover risk assessment and situational awareness, as well as practical strategies and tactics for preparing to cover civil disturbances. Topics will include protective gear, positioning yourself in a crowd, how to deal with that tear gas, rubber bullets, and other riot and crowd control tactics. Today's training is led by Judith Matloff, a veteran reporter at the DART Center, and she is also a senior safety advisor at the DART Center. She teaches crisis reporting at Columbia's Graduate School of Journalism, and she trailblazed safety training for women and media organizations around the globe, helping hundreds of journalists survive an increasingly dangerous world, as we all know. And with over 40 years as a journalist, she has covered top international stories, including Rwanda's genocide, apartheid, and the rise of Vladimir Putin. Her essays have appeared in the New York Times Magazine, Forbes, the Financial Times, the Los Angeles Times, and the Wall Street Journal. Earlier in her career, Matloff headed the Moscow and Africa bureaus of the Christian Science Monitor, and she spent a decade reporting for Reuters from various countries. Matloff consults for leading organizations around the world and has pioneered protocols for digital, gender, and physical security. Clients have included NBC, the United Nations, the Society of Professional Journalists, the State Department, and of course, SAG-AFTRA, and many others. Her training company, Security Rules, LLC, offers workshops for a variety of dangerous situations. Matloff's latest book, and I love the title, Judith, How to Drag a Body And yeah, how to drag a body and other safety tips you hope to never ever use. It shares her expert advice on nearly every conceivable peril that you could possibly face. She also earlier published No Friends But the Mountains, which drew a link between geography and conflict. Another book, Fragments of a Forgotten War, about Angola's civil war, and Homegirl, which chronicled a Harlem street run by a drug gang. She is a graduate of Harvard. Her work has won the support of the MacArthur Foundation, the Fulbright and Logan nonfiction programs, and Stanford's Hoover Institution. And Judith, I wish I had an applause button because you certainly deserve some. So let me just say, hey, here's to you. And this is from all of the participants today. And so with that, I'll turn it over to you for your presentation, Judith.
Thank you, Vicki. I feel humbled by your introduction. First off, you know, I'm very, very happy to meet everybody, but I'm not happy about the circumstances, which is that we're reporting in a very, very challenging situation at the moment. And I know particularly those of you working in broadcast, it's particularly challenging because you're so obvious with your equipment. It makes you so obvious to hostile parties what you're doing. So I hope today's workshop gives you some pointers. And I just want to state at the outset that I see this as an ongoing conversation. So after this morning, or rather this afternoon, wherever you may be, if you have follow-up questions and you want to touch base later on, please consider me a resource going forward. So without much more further ado, I'll launch into you know, I'm mindful of everybody's time, so I'll launch right in. The key thing with any sort of dangerous situation is preparation. So you want to anticipate ahead of time what might happen to you. What's the worst thing that might happen? And what it probably is being physically assaulted, like being bopped on the head, or, you know, being hit by a rubber bullet, inhaling tear gas, or being arrested. So those are probably the three worst things that could happen. So, or contracting COVID because some idiot who's not wearing a mask shouts in front of your face and coughs in your face. So keeping in mind that those are the four worst things that might happen to you, and very, 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 very possible things that might happen to you. What I want to talk about is what you can do tactically in terms of coming up with a strategy, as well as what kind of protective gear you can wear to keep yourself from being, you know, otherwise affected. Now, first off, I want to address COVID because that is a challenge that we haven't faced before, you know, this year when it came to protests. If you want to lessen the chance of contracting it in these large, very volatile crowds, particularly right-wing crowds that may not be wearing masks and are very hostile towards it, what I recommend is that you stay on the edge of the crowd, because that way you can maintain social distancing. You can also move away very quickly. Staying on the edge of the crowd also helps you in terms of avoiding arrest and avoiding being hurt. If you're in the middle of it, which is obviously what a lot of people do because you're right in the thick of it and you get the drama and you get to film the confrontations, that's very good from a visual point of view and a reporting point of view, but from a safety point of view, it's probably the worst thing you can do. Usually if you're on the edge of a crowd, you can still capture the drama in any event. But again, you know, I'm just approaching things from a safety point of view. And what you really want to be at all times is on the edge and sussing out how you can get away if you need to. So that would be number one. The other thing about COVID, I would suggest bringing extra PPE with you. Vicki was telling me before we started that she was in a situation where she got separated from her PPE by about 5 miles. So what you want to do is always have it on your body, because as Vicki has found out, as well as I think every one of us who's covered a demonstration, these things get really unpredictable and things move really quickly, and crowds just don't do things the way you expect they will. So you want to always have your equipment on you and not ever be separated from it. And to that end, I would also recommend having more than you anticipate. Just bring a ton of masks. a ton of masks, because you may be interviewing people that don't have masks and may be willing to put them on. The other thing is with tear gas and pepper spray, your mask is going to get contaminated very quickly. So carry a Ziploc bag that's closed, sealed, that has, I would say, at least 7, 8 extra masks with you. Bring extra wipes and whatnot to wipe down your cameras, your microphones, whatever. Bring extra gloves, disinfecting solutions, but just have all that with you. And in order to carry everything, I like this handy little bag. And I just want to say, I don't own shares in this company, so I'm not like marketing it to you to like make money. It's called a crossbody bag. You can just go on Amazon and look for it. I'll show you what it looks like. It's very ergonomic. You can put a ton of stuff in it. I always put my press badge right here. I don't recommend that you wear your press badge. You certainly don't want it on a lanyard, which somebody could choke you with. But if you keep it right here, it's easily accessible. Because of the hostility against journalists these days, I think for the most part, except for perhaps Portland, which is a unique case, it's better not to have emblazoned on you that you're with the media in most circumstances. But again, your particular town or municipality may be different. So anyway, so in this bag.
Let me just, can I just comment on that? Because one thing that they do in Detroit, because we did have a situation where a couple of reporters were taken down by, the police, and they didn't know that they were journalists. So what the police department started doing was printing out these 8x10. You print them out and it's like a huge, hello, 8x10 piece of paper that says, it has the city logo and it's a different color for every day, so that the police can identify journalists quickly. But, for anybody that wants to attack a journalist, then we're just, open game if we have to wear, an 8x10, on the front of our clothing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to leave it to you in your areas to assess whether it's a good idea or not, because every area is different. And unfortunately with safety, the answer is usually it depends. but definitely, so in Vicky's case, yeah, I mean, it's kind of a pro, it's kind of a con. I don't know if maybe you should just have it handy where you can whip it out.
Right.
And that would be my preference. But if the police are demanding this, I mean, the other question is, the police have not been that kind to journalists. Are they doing this also to target you? I mean, that would be my question, which you're in a better position to answer. But if you don't feel comfortable wearing something like that, again, the beauty of a bag like this, it's right here. You can zip it up, bring it out, and maybe that's where you want to put that piece of paper. Keep it right there where you can whip it out really quickly and hold it up. But again, I'll leave it to you all to decide what's the right thing to do in, with the specifics of your situation. So the other thing, so you've got your PPE in this bag. I would also recommend, since tear gas and pepper spray are probably the most common weaponry used against protesters and journalists as well, that always have a change of clothes with you and wear clothing that you don't mind throwing away. Because what you want to do is, once your clothing is permeated with these contaminants, you just want to get them off you. And you really don't want to wash them in your machine because the chemicals will stay in the machine. So what a lot of people I know do is they just wear disposable rain gear, like a rain jacket, rain pants, and gloves. It looks really ugly, but the thing is you can throw it away quickly. And it's also good in case they use water cannons, that it's also useful for that. And underneath this waterproof stuff, you can also keep your gear. So that's staying safe from the contaminants. But again, a bag like this is waterproof. Another reason why I like it is that it's right at the front of your body. If you have a backpack behind you, somebody can grab you, somebody can pull you down, they can steal your equipment and your wallet and your phone from inside. But this way, everything's in front of you and you can hold it like this. So I would really, really recommend this. I just got this online. I think it was like $10. It was the Swiss Army, wait, I'm looking for it. The Swiss Army Victorinox. I mean, but there's tons of companies. You can, just get any, but it's this model of bag that I would recommend. It's just gotten me through so many protests, and it's really probably the best thing. Speaking of people grabbing you, you don't want lanyards. You don't want ponytails. You don't want buns. You don't want dangly earrings. You don't want scarves around your neck. You don't want anything that somebody could pull you with. So that's, you know, that's the bag. What I want to do is get back to the question of tactics on your behalf. Like what will be your strategy as you go forward to a demonstration? I think if at all possible, if it's not spontaneous and you know something's going to happen, do as much research as possible into the MO of the police force, as well as the demonstrators, as well as potential counter demonstrators. The first thing you want to find out is there a legal permit for the protest? Because if not, you being present on the scene can actually be swept into the dragnet if the police start arresting people for an illegal assembly. So that's one of the first things you want to establish. The other thing is, you know, every police force is different. What do they usually do to disperse crowds? Do they use rubber bullets? Do they only use tear gas and pepper spray? Do they use water cannons? Do they use sound cannons? Do they use horses, et cetera, et cetera? You want to establish that because that will determine what kind of protective gear you're going to carry with you. And then the counter protesters, you know, if they're right-wing white supremacists, they're probably very hostile to the media. So again, that's going to be part of your strategy when you come up thinking about what your safety tactics are going to be. You know, what kind of hostility there might be. So you've done your research ahead of time. You have a sense, hopefully, of the MO of these folks. If they show up regularly in the same streets, like in Portland, it's a fairly self-contained area, then what you might want to do is scope out ahead of time what your escape route would be ahead of time. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that because things move very, very quickly, you want to have a buddy with you at all time. And if there's nobody available from your own news organization, is there somebody else in the media corps who can serve as your buddy? And ideally, you'll have one or two other people with you, but don't move in a big pack because you can't make decisions in a really, really big group. It's like herding cats. But I would recommend, if at all possible, to try to develop a buddy who you go with every single time, because you know how each other work, you know your tolerance for risk, and you develop a rapport with each other. And with this buddy, what I would suggest is that you always need somebody watching your back. So one of you would be filming or one of you would be reporting while the other one would be watching your back. And you basically share all your reporting material. In a case, you know, in dangerous situations, I think exclusivity and competition go out the window. If you want to operate as safely as possible, you really have to operate as a team. And again, you know, I think 3 is the ideal number, particularly for those of you who are filming, because when you're filming, you're just looking ahead of you and filming. Then you want somebody else holding up the person with the equipment to make sure nobody steals their equipment or knocks them down. And then you want a third person just kind of watching the scene. And the thing about crowds is that they're like animals. They can just flip on a dime. And so you want that third person constantly reading the mood of the crowd. And the thing is, if you see one person in the crowd getting very provocative and getting very, very angry and getting very bullshit, you can guarantee it's going to spread really quickly like an infection. And so as soon as you see somebody kind of raising the emotional temperature of the protest, my advice would be to move away from that person and get as far away as possible, because that's going to lead to a confrontation, which you don't want to be in the middle of. And although it may make great TV and photographs and whatnot, you don't want to be very, very close to that person at that time. Now, the issue of proximity is obviously very, very challenging when you have cameras. My advice, if at all possible, is to be as nimble as you can with as lightweight equipment as you can. If you use a big camera, you're basically saying to hostile parties, arrest me, attack me. And so think about, is there any way that you can be more innocuous and blend in with the crowd? I realize that's very, very difficult for a lot of TV stations, but if at all possible, would it be acceptable to film with your iPhone? I'll give you an example. There's a documentary called Whose Streets, and it was about the demonstrations in Ferguson. And this feature-length, award-winning documentary was filmed almost exclusively with iPhones. So one can get good quality. It's not as good as a big camera, but when it comes to safety, you want to go as small and light as possible. The other thing, speaking of cell phones, I would recommend always having a spare one with you and have lots of spare memory cards. If the cops demand your phone, or whatever, your camera, whatever, take out the memory card with the images that you want to hold on to and give them an empty blank one, or one with like ridiculous images that really don't matter to you. But again, that's why you want somebody watching your back at all times, because if the police are approaching, that person can say to you, the cops are coming, take the card out now. So that's why working by yourself is not a very good thing. The other thing is, if you get hurt or if you get arrested, you and your buddies need to know who to contact. It's absolutely critical. Will it be your newsroom? Will it be their spouse or significant other? But establish that ahead of time. You should also have memorized, I would suggest, the telephone number of wherever you're going to seek legal counsel. If your news organization has legal counsel, everybody should have that number on them, and the lawyers should be consulted to be prepared to accept phone calls if somebody's arrested. If your news organization doesn't have that, or you're a freelancer, what I would suggest is getting the local number of the ACLU and the National Lawyers Guild, because they will provide free legal advice for journalists who are detained at these circumstances. Another thing I would suggest, which a lot of journalists do, is write with waterproof magic marker the telephone number of your emergency contact, which, by the way, you should have memorized. So if you are arrested, for instance, what they usually do is they get Ziplocs and they put your arms behind your back like that. So you want the number obvious to other people. So you can say, hey, I'm being arrested. Can somebody call my lawyer? It's, it's written on my arm. Or you just call out to the crowd and say, hey, my name is such and such, please call this number. Tell them I've been arrested. But again, the other beauty of having one or two buddies with you, it's harder for the cops to arrest a cluster of 2 to 3 people. It's easier for them to just grab one person, but it becomes labor intensive to grab 2 or 3 at a time. So there's actually safety in numbers when it comes to detention, if you have a group of people together. I would suggest, again, talking about positioning, if you see a line of cops amassing in part of the crowd, that's your sign to move away. Don't go towards them, because they may be kettling, which means that they encircle a group and then you're stuck there and you can't get out of it. And you can talk about the First Amendment, you can talk about free speech as much as you like, you can tell them you need to go to the bathroom. They don't really give a shit. They will keep you in that thing. So as soon as you see a cluster of cops, that's your sign to actually move away. You also in no way want to be right in the middle of 2 groups, protesters and police, who are shouting at each other and throwing things at each other, or protesters and counter-protesters. Now, from a safety point of view, it's logic would have it, it's safer being behind the cops, who have sort of greater means of force. They're the ones with the rubber bullets and the tear gas and whatnot. But the problem with being behind the cops is the protesters may turn against you, or you're stuck behind the cops, or the cops will turn around and arrest you. So if the 2 opposing parties are here, you don't want to be where my head is. You probably want to be where the painting is behind me, because that's on the side and it's far away enough that you can run away through the door, which is right over there. So that's what you want to do. But you do not want to get, although it makes great visuals, you really don't want to be caught in the middle. And I've been studying a lot of video, the text that Vicki was mentioning. I've been studying a lot of video of that, scores and scores and scores of scenes. And nearly every case where a journalist has been hurt in protests, they've been right up against, the cops or the protesters or counter-protesters. They've been right there during the most provocative scenes. So again, you know, you've got to weigh your images and your reporting versus safety. But from a safety point of view, you just don't want to be where trouble is, because you could get caught in the middle. Are there any questions? Or so Deborah, did you have a question? Or yeah? Deborah's speaking, but I can't hear her. Can somebody else?
Okay, now I'm on. All right.
Hi, Deborah. Hi.
Yeah. Hi. Yes. I mean, absolutely everything you're saying is correct. The difficulty isn't even necessary. I mean, because I sadly have been in the position that you were talking about.
Yeah.
I always want to be on the outside of the protest,
Yeah.
but you know,
I know you can't.
I ended up in the middle, and you know,
Yeah.
oh my God. So, I mean, the problem wasn't that here in Seattle, the problem wasn't I was going to be arrested by the police. That wasn't the issue. It's just that the crowd can change so
Yes.
quickly that I fell at one point, and then people picked me up. I mean, that was the most amazing thing. The protesters picked me up, found my phone that fell, and that was pretty astonishing. But I knew if I stayed on the ground, I would be trampled. And
Yes.
they knew that too, so they helped me. But you know, so you're absolutely right. You don't want to be in that position. And I still am not sure how I found myself in that position. I was with my photographer, but I don't know, things just got out of hand. And I don't ever I like to be on the outside of it if it's possible. It's just that sometimes, you know, you can't be. You end up there by accident. I mean, it's not even like, it wasn't the video so much. It's just that I misjudged the crowd, and every crowd has its own personality. Yeah. And you do know it when you're there, but I've been in crowds where people have said, oh God, I was so worried about you. No problem. I knew there was no problem. There was no tension. You know, the crowd was large, but not angry. And then, you know, so, I mean, I love what you're saying. I just wanted to say that, yes, I've been in that position, and no, I've never been attacked by the police, but we were pepper sprayed because we were between the police and the protesters. And then of course my first instinct was to run, of course, toward the police, and then they pushed me back.
You're right.
Oh, it was not a good day.
No, I hear you. And what you have to realize is I'm simply talking about what's ideal. And I fully understand that when you're in the thick of it and things are moving quickly, and, you know, crowds are like schizophrenic people, like they have different personalities, which can all be happening at the same time. So no, I absolutely hear you. I'm simply putting forth ideal best practices, which may not necessarily be achievable, but just something to keep in your head, just so that you're aware that a crowd may turn, like what Deborah was talking about. So at least if you anticipate and are prepared for it to happen, you still may very easily find yourself swept into it as she did, but hopefully at least you will have been prepared for it to happen. You know,
right, and Judith, Judith, I was in a similar situation, and you're dead on, but this is when the police turned on the crowd, and the heads up was looking ahead of the protesters and seeing a line of cops in riot gear, and that was the heads up. And then they had the armored cars behind them, and I'm off on the side. So I was positioned well, but again, you know, they had marched 5 miles away from my news truck, which is where my PPE was, my gas mask and all that was in the news truck. And so when the tear gas was sprayed, you know, it was lucky because I was on the outside and not right up front. But I think what really affected me most was just witnessing the brutality. I mean, they were picking up bicycles and just throwing them to the ground. One guy was almost like he lifted it up in the air like a body slam and threw him down, and I saw his face hit the pavement. And so that was a little traumatic, because this was my first day back in the field after working from home for 2.5 months. And it was like, wow, where am I? Am I back in 1967? Where are we?
we're not in a good place.
Right.
But again, I'll talk a little bit more about what kind of defensive gear we can bring and whatnot. But I think, you know, the beauty of being in a bad situation, and I'm not at all happy that you were in this situation, but the beauty of a bad situation is, you know, next time you'll know what to do in case it happens. So my recommendation to everybody is anticipate the worst possible thing that could happen at a protest, and then think backwards as to how you might be able to mitigate or avoid it or escape it. But yeah, I mean, as both Deborah and Vicki pointed out, sometimes there's nothing you can do, you know, other than anticipate it and then watch it happen. I want to return to something Deborah said, which is about stampedes, which is, again, that's another reason why you want another body with you, because you're less likely to fall if you can put your arms around each other. So hopefully travel with somebody who you don't mind if they put their arms around you during a protest. But having said that, jokes aside, if there is a crowd moving towards you, it's really, really scary. And what you can't see, you know, where I'm sitting right now, is I'm a really tiny, short, diminutive person. And I weigh less than a bag of cement. So I am terrified when crowds come after me, because you could sneeze and I'll like fall on the ground. So, but I will say that if you do see a crowd coming and you are scared of a stampede, if you can wrap your arms around a tree, around a lamppost, or your one or two reporting buddies, you're gonna be more stable. The other thing is that if the crowd is moving this way, you know, people usually die in stampedes, not because they're trampled, but because they're asphyxiated from what's 800 pounds of human flesh pressing against them. So if the crowd is moving like this, put your arms in front of your chest so that there's a bit of a, you know, like this, so there's a bit of a protection, a barrier, and go diagonal to the crowd. And that will give you a little bit more protection. You won't be you know, you won't be like a squished sandwich. You'll just be like a bent sandwich. So anyway, that's a little stampede tip.
I see a question, Judith, from Paris. She's in Chicago.
Hi, Paris. Hi.
You're on mute. I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. Judith, I just want to thank you so much. This is such an important talk and such great advice. So here in Chicago, as the civil unrest grew, you know, more dangerous, our station started sending out a security person with our crew. So me as a reporter, a camera person, and every now and then a producer, you know, because I felt we weren't really taking this seriously, and we needed to do something. And I feel that with the security, you know, we have this mean looking guy with sunglasses walking around with us, and it almost makes us look more conspicuous and almost kind of like, it makes the participants want to trust us even less. Yeah. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on having an actual security. They tend to be like not retired cops, like off-duty cops or stuff like that. What's your opinion on having a station send out a security person with the crew?
Okay, I want to start out that I'm not making a judgment on decisions that stations have made. I personally don't like the idea of having a security guard. And, you know, if you look at what happened, what was it, last week in Denver, somewhere in Colorado, where the security guard actually shot somebody. That is the problem of having these former military or former law enforcement guys with them, that their tendency is to pull a weapon or to get very confrontational. I think you're absolutely right, Paris. I think it can be very provocative to have these guys with you. They don't look like journalists. And I really question what value they give, because if you're in if you've got your little reporting team of 2 to 3 people, maybe 4 people, you can watch the situation as well as the security guy. And you don't want to be with somebody who has a concealed or an open weapon. I mean, that really complicates things. So my question would be, what value are these people really giving? You know, maybe it's better to just have an intern with you, you know, watching what's going on and being situationally aware as you're going about doing reporting. Deborah,
yeah,
you
I agree with that.
Sorry.
Thank you. That's kind of what, in practice, it just, as a journalist, I felt like really like these folks don't trust me right now, because we have this big guy with a concealed weapon walking with us, and I think it does more harm than good. So it's good to hear that.
Yeah, I would tend to, but again, I don't want to pass judgment on a station which is trying to protect their staff.
Right.
I mean, I think that's great that the station is caring about your security. Deborah, did you have a question?
Yeah, Deborah, I think had a follow-up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did want to say one thing. Well, I don't agree with you in one fundamental way, and that is that the situation now can be that you need it. Well, first of all, I have a photographer, and the photographers will not leave the parking lot, which is what we have been for the last few months, without a security guard. So it doesn't matter whether I want one or not. So they will not go. They now want to wear bulletproof vests. Not one person has been shot or anything like that, but the fear has risen to such an extent that they will go no place without one. And I know that in our situation, when nothing was happening at all the protesting, it was over hours earlier, and we were in front of a building that had been, where the windows had been smashed. I was on live, and we happened to have a security guard that I didn't even think we needed. And as I was talking, I could see out of the corner of my eye somebody walking toward me, and of course, when you're live, you're disabled, essentially. I mean, there was nothing I could even, I barely saw him. I saw him in a way, but the security guard had to push him out of the way or just keep him away. He isn't armed. So I think that one way around it is to pick people who aren't armed. I do have one funny story, funny in retrospect, and that is the very first day of the protests at around 12:30, before things got really bad. This was a Saturday. Our guard was on the phone, and he gets off the phone. He says, "Okay, I'm out of here." And I said, "What? You're leaving?" He said, "Yeah, because my company says it's too dangerous for us to stay and provide security." And I said, wait, hold it. You are the security people? And it's too dangerous for you? We can't leave. And so that was the day that I ended up getting pepper sprayed, because we had to double up crews because we couldn't not cover it. I mean, there was just no way to not cover it. But one of their guards had been killed in Oakland the day before or something at a protest. And so the company had decided that this was too dangerous for them to provide security. I mean,
yeah. Okay, can
security.
I just...
So it became an issue.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I want to address this, and then we have so much other material I want to move on. It's your news organization. You're going to have to work out how you negotiate with your news editors, with your managers, and with your photographers as to what the right way is. But what I'm hearing from Deborah is that having these people is very problematic, because you think you're going to get security and you're not. And it adds another layer of complication to your reporting, because you're not only negotiating with your team, you're suddenly negotiating with the security company. And I just think it complicates things. And even if the guy isn't armed, if he pushes somebody, he can be booked for assault. So what's the guy going to do that you're not going to do? It just creates problems for the news organization. So again, with your issue, Deborah, you're going to have to negotiate with your company and your station. If the photographers don't want to go, maybe the photographers are right. Maybe they shouldn't be leaving the parking lot, but I think that's a negotiation that goes beyond just safety. It's about the kind of negotiations that go in a work situation. But if it's okay, if we can just move on, because I think, again, my feeling is it's not really providing value, and it's going to complicate your job having these guys with you. What I do recommend, again, is to work in a team so that you're all looking around. The other thing, which I also recommend, is have a meeting of all your regional, like if you have a regional press club, or or maybe all the press corps, the media corps in your area, and maybe get on a WhatsApp group. People do this a lot during Occupy, and I worked with a lot of Mexican journalists during a time when there were street protests every day over a course of a year. And what happened is, people, I think it was Vicky that mentioned that, further on something was happening, but it wasn't exactly where you were. And if you're in a WhatsApp group, other journalists who are 5 blocks from you can say, hey guys, stay away from Fifth Avenue because the cops are kettling right there. So I think you want to form basically a news corps of everybody who's covering this in your area. And again, I can't stress enough, competition just has to go out the window if security is important to you. And, you know, team up with, you know, print reporters do things differently than broadcast people, and they're at different points of the crowd. And so it might be helpful to, you know, wrap them into your reporting core, as it were. And just, but again, you want to trade information about what the cops or the protesters are doing in another part of town where you aren't, because then that can help you decide whether you want to go there or not. So I would really recommend that. Let me see if there's anything else I need to tell you about positioning. Any other questions about where to position yourself in a crowd before I move into gear?
No.
No? Okay, good. Okay, right, okay. So now gear, again, this is where your prior research is gonna be. Everybody's using tear gas. Everybody is using pepper spray. Now, there's a lot of mythology surrounding tear gas and pepper spray. When I was in Mexico, people were pouring Coca-Cola into their eyes to wash it out. I mean, you probably shouldn't even drink Coca-Cola for what it does to your stomach and your digestive system. You definitely don't want to put it in your eyes. The other thing which I've seen all around the world, and people are doing this across the United States as well, is they're soaking a bandana or a scarf with lemon juice or vinegar, or they're rubbing an onion on it, and then they put that on their face. And the logic behind it is that the acid in these cooking, you know, vegetable dressing ingredients will actually neutralize the tear gas. That's actually urban myth. It does nothing to neutralize it. And then, you know, you use that stuff when you come home after the protest to make a salad or something, but like, don't stick it on your face. It does no good. You're wasting your money. Just keep it in the kitchen. The other thing that a lot of people do, particularly with pepper spray, is they take milk products like cream or milk, and they'll wash their eyes out with it. Don't do that, because dairy products actually have acid in it, and it actually reacts with the tear gas, and it's not the best thing. The best thing to use to flush your eyes and your skin is water. Now, the problem with tear gas, it's not actually gas, it's a crystal. And when you add water to it, it expands. And when it expands, it hurts like hell. But the thing is, what you need to do is irrigate your eyes, and you've got to irrigate your skin. So it's gonna hurt like hell when you flush yourself with water, but just keep flushing, because it's the only way to decontaminate. And the other thing I would recommend, particularly those of you, if anybody's coming from Flint, do not use the water that comes out of the tap to flush your eyes, because that water is not clean. So what you want to use is probably bottled water. It's more expensive. But if you're in an area where the tap water isn't clean, don't use tap water, because whatever is in that can make your eyes infected or whatever.
Jeff has a question here. It might be on this topic.
Jeff, where are you, Jeff? Jeff.
There we go. I think I'm unmuted. Hi, I do recall a note on the tear gas remedy a few years ago. It was from another SAG-AFTRA event for broadcast journalists, and the tip came from a radio reporter in Los Angeles who's quite well known there, but I don't recall the person's name. And he suggested the remedy for tear gas was 50% baby shampoo and 50% saline solution, and that was something that he put together and carried with him in his own emergency kit. 50% baby shampoo.
Don't put baby shampoo in your eyes.
Can't endorse it, just passing it on for a check.
Yeah, yeah. Don't, with your eyes, just water. And again, you don't want to put shampoo in your eyes. I mean, it's like, you don't normally put shampoo in your eyes. Like, it's just not healthy. So don't do that. I'm glad you raised that, Jeff, so that we could rip it apart and say why not to do it. Now, with pepper spray, this is something where just water in itself will not work. If you get pepper spray, again, with the eyes, just water, or saline solution. With your skin with pepper spray, what you should do is get a spray bottle, let's say yay high, and put 1/3 antacid like milk of magnesia or Mylanta, and then 2/3 water, again, clean water, not Flint water. And you spray it on the skin, and the antacid will neutralize the acid of the pepper spray and the burn. The other thing, you know, this is a problem. Like a lot of us will, if the sun's really strong, we'll put sunscreen on, but sunscreen can actually trap these chemicals into your skin. So again, if you're worried about contamination from these things, it's better to get a sunburned nose than to actually get them tracked. Makeup, skin lotion, all that kind of stuff can trap it into your skin and into your face. So, and this is a problem for TV people because they have to look TV ready and, you know, with makeup and everything, but just be aware that that makeup is going to make the tear gas worse for you if it hits your face.
The tear gas and pepper spray or both?
Both. Yeah. So again, I'm just simply laying out what the best safety practices are, but you guys are going to have to evaluate and weigh which is more important. But it is a problematic thing to have anything that's viscous and creamy on your face. It can it can really trap in those particles. In terms of how to protect yourself, your eyes, you know, even swim goggles can afford some kind of protection, or, you know, scuba goggles. A lot of journalists use ballistic goggles, also with rubber bullets. You know, if the cops are using rubber bullets in your area, you really want ballistic goggles. They can cost as little as $15. Just go online and look at protective eyewear. Even, you know, the stuff that construction workers wear, contractors wear when they're doing that type of work, that will protect your eyes. And so again, you know, it's something you really want to think about because people have had their eyes damaged permanently from rubber bullets or even paintballs. You know, these right-wingers are using paintballs right now, and they can actually really hurt your organs and your eyes. In terms of your head, I personally like bike helmets because you look like an ordinary person. You don't look like you're going into battle. But if you can also get a ballistic helmet from an Army surplus shop for something like, you know, $20. Again, just go online and type in, you know, ballistic helmet and see what comes up. You could wear a construction helmet, like, you know, you could get one at Home Depot that will protect it. Again, I like bike helmets because they look very civilian. They don't look very military. But you could also get a baseball catcher's hat, you know, cap. Those also have great protection. But, you know, people are throwing all kinds of things. You know, they're throwing tear gas, they're throwing Molotov cocktails. You know, the cops are bopping people with batons. So I think head protection is something that everybody wants. And again, you know, the beauty of this lovely bag, which I do not have shares in, is that you can just strap, if you don't feel like wearing your helmet and messing up your hair and everything, you can just like strap it onto the strap here and just have it hanging. You know, these helmets don't weigh very much. In terms of rubber bullets and paintballs and even water cannons can cause internal contusions, I really think people should think about getting a ballistic vest, you know, a body armor. You can get it, you can rent it from Reporters Without Borders very cheaply, or if you go to a used, like a, you know, an Army surplus company, I think they cost like $100 or $200. I know they do make you look like you're a combatant, but the point is, if people are shooting rubber bullets, you want to be protected. And what concerns me about these white supremacists, you know, the people like the Proud Boys, is they shoot people. They actually shoot people, and, you know, a vest can protect you. So it's something, again, that your station needs to talk about. Do you have the budget for it? Will it make you more of a target or not? Again, it's one of those depends things. But if you're worried about live ammo, rubber bullets, and paintballs, I would really suggest thinking about investing in a Kevlar vest. Now, the thing about Kevlar vests is they weigh a lot. They weigh 15 to 30 pounds, depending on what weight. And you really have to practice wearing it. Like if you're walking 5 miles in a protest, the way Vicky did, that thing is just going to weigh on you, particularly if you're in an area where it's really, really, the weather is quite hot. So again, you know, it's not something to take lightly. You actually have to do some training wearing in it, because I remember the first time I put one on, it was a shock. It was like, oh my God, you know, I can't breathe. This, you know, my God, I got to walk 3 miles and this thing is like horrible. So again, you know, get to know the gear before you actually put it on, and then you're stuck outside for 10 hours running. You know, make sure you're pretty physically fit. The other thing, you know, again, getting back to tear gas, which I think people have to talk about, is if anybody has any underlying physical conditions, it's hard for them to run, they have asthma, you know, really think very carefully about deploying that person into a protest. And I think there has to be some kind of honest discussion in the newsroom about anybody who has that kind of underlying condition. The other thing I would suggest is that if you have medication that you cannot be without, for instance, let's say you need insulin, bring it with you, because if you're arrested and you're in the police station and you need your insulin, they're not going to let you leave the jail to go home to get your medication, nor may they allow somebody to bring it with you. So, you know, always anticipate that you may be arrested and think about what would you need for the next 12 or 24 hours. And to that point, I would also say, always bring a warm sweater with you and extra snacks. Always make sure your phone is charged ahead of time, even bring a spare phone. And also always bring government issued ID, because if you are arrested, it will help them process you quicker through the system if you can actually show that ID. I would also recommend that you make photocopies of your press accreditation and your ID, so that if they want it, you can show them the real thing, but hand over the photocopy. Like, you don't want to be separated from your identification. They may insist on it, but you know, don't. So I've talked about helmets, jackets, face. I would also recommend really good shoe wear. One thing we've been hearing a lot about is people twisting their ankles during these protests. So wear a good leather lace-up boot. That's very lightweight, like a lightweight hiking leather boot. The reason why you want leather is that if they're Molotov cocktails or anything, or people are setting fires, the leather will protect your foot. It's also a good thing to have for those of you that cover fires, by the way. Leather footwear is the best. But you don't want to wear sneakers or trainers, because they don't give you that ankle support. So, you know, good footwear that's been worn in so that you don't get blisters is really, it's like such a critical thing for covering these things. Does anybody here deal with sound cannons? No? Okay. Because that's kind of big in the East Coast, particularly Pennsylvania. I'll just cover sound cannons very quickly. Because, you know, the other thing about law enforcement is they do certain things, and then suddenly they see a police department somewhere else doing it, and they go, wow, that's really interesting. And the next thing you know, they're like using a new form of crowd control, which is like really vicious that you hadn't anticipated. What you want is noise canceling earphones, and even the Bose ones, boys, are not good enough. You want the industrial level ones, like the sort of things people wear in shooting galleries, or what construction workers wear. Because the thing about sound cannons is they emit this special pitch that can make you lose your balance. It can impair your hearing forever. It can make you nauseous and nauseated and vomiting for days afterwards. And it can give you the most god-awful earaches that can linger and linger and linger. So again, if they are using sound cannons, you really want that kind of protective gear. Let me see. So I think that's pretty much it with gear. Any questions about gear?
Well, you know what? I want to go back to one point, and you briefly touched on it. Just because I remember walking that 5 miles, and I think if I had all that equipment on me, I was already a sweaty mess.
Yeah.
Because it was very hot that day. How do you figure out what you really like, the essentials? I mean, sure, we want to be as best prepared as possible, but there's probably a line between carrying something that's going to weigh you down and you're not going to be as nimble, you know, stuff that you may not need. So how do you kind of find that balance?
Right. Really good question. It's one of those depends. I mean, if you think there's going to be live ammo, I think you just have to be prepared for that. A helmet and ballistic glasses don't weigh very much. They're really, particularly like a bike helmet, it doesn't weigh anything. And again, if you have a bag like this, where you can just strap them onto the strap, you're not actually holding them in your hands. Right. Obviously your camera gear weighs a lot, but if you can go with a lighter gear, that kind of thing, it's a problem. The other thing I would recommend is when you're out at the demonstration, check in constantly with the newsroom. And if this is possible from a deployment point of view, if you need something, could somebody rush out from the newsroom and top you up with equipment and what you need? Or maybe they should relieve you. But, if you're in constant contact with your newsroom or your editor, I guess the newsroom's they're not really operating, people are still working from home. So if there's any way that you can be in constant contact with somebody from your newsroom, who can send in another person, who can send in equipment. But I think it's really critical. People are really getting hurt at these things. People are getting arrested. And I think you can't be out alone. Somebody has got to be, every half hour, you've got to be in touch with the people. And that's another reason why you should have a spare phone, I think. Even if it's just a burner phone. But I think, no, Victoria, Vicki, it's a real problem. It's a real problem.
Well, you know what? Luckily that day, one of our digital people who wanted to test out his drone came out. So my biggest concern was a ride back to my news truck. So.
Yeah, but that's the other advantage of having a WhatsApp group with other journalists from other news organizations, because somebody might have a spare mask, they might have a spare battery, they might have a spare whatever. Or maybe they've got a car and another person who could drive you back.
And can you go over the face mask, the gas mask? Because the ones that the station gave us, you can't just wear it. You have to wear it like in that moment. You can't.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So explain that a little bit. I've never actually had to wear one, but we, through the union, I made sure that everybody had, a container that has all that equipment in it.
Yeah. I mean, Vicki's absolutely right. You can't wear it for hours. You also can't really report in it because nobody can hear you through it. If you wear glasses, it's problematic because, you got glasses and then this thing, and they're really claustrophobic. Like I personally panic when I'm in one. I'm just one of those claustrophobic type people. It's very, very problematic. It also makes you really stand out. You would only put it on, again, this is where the situational awareness is absolutely critical. If you see the cops, shooting out a lot of canisters, what you want to do is put it on at that moment. But, a lot of times with tear gas, you don't actually need it. If you've got the swim goggles or other protective eyewear around your face, and you've got you've got something around your mouth, you don't necessarily need a gas mask. But it's something that you put on very, very quickly, and you run as far as you can from that situation, and then you take it off. But that's one of those cases where you don't linger. Put it on, just get the hell out of there, and then take it off. Yeah. And the thing about them, they've got these charcoal filters which have to be changed. So the other thing, giving somebody a gas mask is all well and good, but the station has to have a lot of extra filters. Okay. They're horrible to wear.
Right. They don't look very comfortable.
Yeah. Does anybody have any more questions about gear? Because what I'd like to do is move into negotiations with hostile people.
No, I don't see
Deborah?
any.
Deborah, yeah. I can't hear.
I missed the part about the bag that you
yeah, it's it's like a triangular crossbody bag. You can get them online, just a crossbody bag. They're waterproof. This is the model I use, but I'm not recommending one brand over another. And see, the beauty of it, Deborah, is it has these little pockets. So you could have like your credential right here. You can put a lot of your gear into it, and it sits in the front of your body. so that, like, you don't want to wear a backpack, which is, first of all, not ergonomic if you're walking 5 miles. And also, you don't want a backpack which somebody could grab or slice with a knife and take stuff out of it. So this is, it's extremely comfortable, even for people with osteo issues. So
and you said it's only about $10.
Yeah, I bought one for $10. You know, maybe it's 15, maybe it's 20, but they're also really great for hiking if anybody likes doing hiking. So they're multi-purpose. Yeah, any other questions about gear before we move into negotiation with horrible people?
I don't see any.
Okay, good. Okay, negotiations with horrible people. Okay, the thing about the cops, you constantly have to think about how they see you. You know, you're like the most neutral, balanced, professional, wonderful person in the world. The cops just see you as being an obstruction. And so you have to be constantly aware of how other people see you. So how you dress, for instance, is really, really important. If Antifa is really big anywhere, or even if they aren't, just don't wear black, because black sends out a message, Antifa. And the cops are obsessed with Antifa thanks to our president. So even if it's not Portland, if they see somebody dressed all in black, which is what I do all the time as a New Yorker, like I have to have special clothes just to go to a demonstration because all my clothes are black. Don't wear black. And what you want to do is kind of blend in a way that you don't look like you're going to make trouble. So just dress in the most neutral way possible. Now, I've heard some news stations expect people to, you know, really dress nicely and whatnot. And I understand that, but it makes you stand out in a crowd. So again, you're going to have to negotiate with your news station whether you can look quite informal with sporty clothes, because you're more likely to blend in that way. But I've seen people wear blazers and jackets to demonstrations, and I don't think that's good, because a lot of people might think you're an undercover agent or a detective, because detectives wear suits. So again, think really careful about what you look like. And what you want to do is like be somebody who nobody notices visually, like the way you're dressed and everything. Okay, so that's A. So B, so the cops don't want you there. They don't want you there. They may hate you because you're media, or they just see everybody there as an obstruction. So if a cop tells you to move, don't get into a whole discussion, even a pleasant discussion about your First Amendment rights and the role of the press and everything. Just because if you do that, then they're going to say you're obstructing justice, and then they're going to arrest you, like if they're horrible people, which they oftentimes are. Just say, sorry, officer, you know, I understand, and just move away. And as soon as they turn their attention to harassing somebody else, then you go back to doing whatever you want to do. But just really don't argue with them. And likewise, if some horrible right-winger comes up and starts screaming at you, just say, I'm really sorry, and just move away, because there's no way you can have a rational discussion with somebody who doesn't want you there. So that would be my advice. Now, there is a very big problem at the moment. A lot of law enforcement are demanding that you hand over your camera and your phone. They cannot demand that if they don't have a warrant, and that you have to be absolutely clear with them. And that's where you want the telephone number of a lawyer, and you say, I'm going to call my lawyer right now. You have no right to do this. That's the one thing. Again, be very polite, but be very, very insistent. The other thing, if they seem like they're detaining you, get them to state that they are detaining you. Say, are you detaining me? Are you arresting me? And just repeat the question over and over again, and get an answer, and say, why are you arresting me? But again, don't be confrontational about it. And again, that's the other beauty of having a buddy with you, or two buddies with you, because they can document what's happening while it's happening. It's very hard to arrest two people side by side simultaneously. So you want it all documented. It is within your legal right, and I would say your journalistic responsibility, to document police brutality against a colleague or against a demonstrator or against anybody, but you want to do it in the most subtle way possible. So again, if you're getting right up into their face and doing a close-up of what's happening, you're more likely going to be pulled into the dragnet. So you want to be as safe a distance as possible and as innocuous as possible as you're filming it. And again, that's the sort of thing that you might want to film on your phone rather than your big camera, because you'll just look like any ordinary bystander who's just like watching the whole thing. If you are arrested, you're allowed one phone call, and you should insist on it and know beforehand who you're going to call. Is it your news editor? Is it your significant other? Is it a lawyer? I would recommend it not being a significant other. I think you should have some kind of chain of communication with your news organization, that if something happens to you, they call the significant other. But what you want is, you want somebody who's professionally equipped to handle the situation, and a significant other will probably be very, very upset emotionally and may not really handle the situation as well as a lawyer would, or as well as a news editor would. So again, and make clear to whoever is important to you, you know, I use the word significant other, you know, it could be your mother, it could be your brother, it could be whoever, but you know, make clear to that person that if anything happens to you, they will be getting a call from the news organization, so that, you know, everybody's on the same page about what might happen. Usually when journalists are arrested, you know, and it could be for, the charges may be obstruction of justice or, you know, something like that. Usually charges are dropped. They're very, very rarely maintained. These things rarely go to court, but it's a hassle. It's time consuming. It wraps up resources at the news organization, and it could keep you off the streets for a while, you know, from reporting. So again, what, you know, if at all possible, try to avoid a situation where you are detained, although I realize it's not always avoidable. The other thing to keep in mind, this is really, really, really unfortunate, and it's a delicate thing to raise, but I will, which is, these white supremacists are obviously going to be more hostile to people of color. And oftentimes the law enforcement are as well. So when the news organization is thinking about who are they deploying to a particular protest, it's important to think about whether a particular reporter is going to be more vulnerable to attack, more likely to be attacked than another person in the office. And I think it's just something that one has to have an honest discussion about from a safety point of view. I'm not saying people of color should never go to demonstrations. I'm not at all saying that. But if it's something where the Proud Boys are, I think in a case like that, they are such viciously racist people. It might be safer. It's just a discussion to have in the newsroom from a safety point of view. But these people, you know, they are super, super racist. And, you know, I noticed, I got a lot of calls from a lot of journalists in Minnesota. There was a whole team from Vice News. It was a team of 4 people. The white reporter was not detained, and 3 African Americans were. And, you know, they were a reporting team. They were all 4 standing together. And what did the cops do? They dragged off the 3 who were people of color. And it's just a really sad reality. So it's just something, have a discussion about it in the newsroom. You figure out how you want to work it. But remember that people of color are going to be more vulnerable to violence and to arrest for the most part in many areas. You know, one more challenge,
right?
that you don't need, right? I'm just trying to think if I left anything out. Let me just, you know, I talked so much. I just want to make sure I didn't leave anything out. Another thing I would recommend, because law enforcement is so hostile to people of all color, is, if at all possible, can your newsroom or one of your senior editors have a meeting with the head of police, or if it's going to be the National Guard, the local National Guard. I mean, you know, the National Guard, that's something that we should anticipate. They may be called into some of these cities. So you might want to find out who is the point person at your local National Guard, because they're probably going to be called into Washington, D.C. They may be called into other states. So get a contact there. And what I would suggest is, if at all possible, have a meeting with who's ever head of law enforcement in your jurisdiction, and say, look, our reporters have to do reporting. Can you give us what's called a safe passage letter? In other words, a letter with the, the local police stamp and everything saying, we are aware that, Jane Smith is accredited with, WKYT, and we'll be covering demonstrations. Please allow them, free access or whatever, whatever would go into a letter. And this is particularly important when there are curfews. Like, I'm in New York, and journalists had the right to be out after curfew when we had curfew during the time of rioting. And but you needed a letter from somebody. Oftentimes, like if you were stopped on the street, the cops will say, well, I don't care, you're not supposed to be here. But if you had a letter from the NYPD, you could pull rank on these petty officers who were in the street and say, I'm sorry, I have a letter here of permission, I am allowed to be out. So it's just something to think about and anticipate, because we could very well be seeing curfews after the election. I don't think before, but afterwards. So you might want to anticipate thinking about that now. You also, something I hadn't mentioned about tactics, I'm just going to go back to that. With tactics, you may, if you're anticipating rioting in a particular area or a lot of confrontations in a particular area, what you might want to do is, before the demonstrations happen or before the anticipated problems that might happen after the elections, when the results are called, try to find some local shopkeeper or a local person who lives there and see if you can use their apartment as a base. Because I'm thinking, Vicki, with your thing, I mean, obviously it wasn't something you could anticipate at that time, but over the course of that 5-mile route, if there was somewhere you could go to use the bathroom, where you could just take a break for a while, particularly when there's tear gas, you want to run in and get, just take a break for a while from everything. So, again, if you can scope that out and think about, maybe set up some certain friendly people in different parts of town where reporters can go and take a break. That's a good idea. If need be. But the problem with demonstrations, you can't always anticipate where they are. But if you know where the route is, or if there's certain parts of town, like here in New York where I live, there were certain parts that were looted night after night. Like, you knew in Soho, there was going to be looting, if anything. So again, in those areas, it would help if you knew somebody who had an apartment in Soho, so you could duck in, to take a break from it. And reporting from a vantage point and filming from a vantage point is obviously safer than being on the ground. So again, if you can scope that out ahead of time, that will make your filming safer.
Neil has a question, Judith.
Okay, Neil?
Yeah, hi.
Oh, hi, Neil.
Yeah, hi.
Oh, hi.
Yeah, forgive me for jumping in this because I'm neither a reporter nor a newscaster, but
sure.
I'm old enough and to remember the 1960s.
Yeah.
I was not a participant, but I observed it. And my parents were active in the civil rights movement. And one of the greatest contributions the journalist made to that movement was to be on the front line, capturing the violence against protesters. And so part of the beginning of your presentation here were instructions for the journalists to stand back. So we have a quote conflict here between the importance of capturing the violence so that everyone else can see it. That, peaceful protests don't make the news as much as violent protests do. And if the violent protests are, they're just and they are righteous, it's a force unto itself in the movement of the hearts and minds of people. So how would you recommend a journalist strike the balance between avoiding violence and being on the front line, risking their own health, capturing the violence for the greater good?
Right. I mean, it's an excellent question, and it is something that you have to calculate. I mean, my presentation is strictly about safety, but obviously, yes, one wants to document things. The thing is, Neil, you can document it from a distance. You don't have to be right up against it. You can do it from the side. You don't have to be right in the middle. If you have a telephoto lens, violence is violence, and it's usually not just one or two people. It usually involves a melee, and you can film it from 4 feet away instead of 3 inches. So actually, if you look at a lot of the civil rights footage, people weren't 2 feet away. They were usually quite a distance when they filmed it. If the police are moving in, they're going to move in force, and you can easily document that from the side. And likewise, the Proud Boys, like when they move around in their caravans, you don't have to be walking right next to the caravan. You can do it from across the street. But yeah, I mean, it's a really important question you raise, and it's something that comes up a lot in war photography as well. But my argument is you can cover it from across the street. You don't have to be right next to it.
Paris also has a question, Judith.
Yeah. Paris?
Hi, Judith. It's just me,
Yeah, hi.
Paris.
Hi.
So, given your experience covering these kinds of conflicts around the world, I keep trying to comprehend in my head what this is going to look like after November 3rd, when you have a president who clearly is not going to accept the results of the election if he loses, and you've got a giant part of the electorate in this information bubble where they're going to believe that their democracy was stolen. You've got these violent white supremacist groups, and then groups on the other side. What do you anticipate this is going to look like?
Right.
I mean, worst case scenario. There's a range of scenarios, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to look, I think, it's funny. I track a lot of these right-wing groups in their chat rooms, and I do think there is a lot of bluster. I think there's a lot of, remember the Proud Boys with their most recent thing where it was in Portland, they were gonna have 10,000 people and they only had 200. I mean, I think these Rambos are gonna go out there, and I think they're gonna create some huge problems, but I don't think we're heading towards civil war in any way. And I think it's going to be restricted geographically. And I think what I would suggest you do is try to get a sense of what groups are active in your jurisdiction, and then try to figure out how to deploy your news crews accordingly. I mean, the Michigan folks, I mean, Vicky's in a better position to judge this than myself, but I think with the recent arrests, those guys may not be as prone to showing up in force the way they might have been a few weeks ago. Portland, I would say, is obviously going to be a huge thing. I mean, it always is. And the Antifa guys are going to be out, and the protesters are going to be out, and that's just going to rev up. Minnesota has I think, look historically where there have been problems before. Louisville, Kentucky was big. Wherever there were anti-mask protests, wherever there were anti-lockdown protests, I think those are probably the areas where people show up. I think Pennsylvania is probably going to be a flashpoint. I think Kentucky will. Just look at historically where these groups have shown up before, because that shows that they're already organized. But I think we're going to see pockets of stuff. Wait, right. If your question relates to violence.
I wouldn't rule out Michigan either, Judith.
Yeah, okay.
Militia, they have history here.
Yeah.
And I was the faction of the Michigan militia that was arrested in the plot to kidnap the governor. But our attorney general here has been pretty aggressive, even going after the people that set up the robocalls to dissuade people from going to the polls. They're being charged. So they've been pretty aggressive, but I don't think it's going to stop everything.
Right.
Especially depending on exactly what happens, on election day.
Yeah, I mean, in answer to your question, Paris, I think, you guys know what your jurisdictions look like better than I do, but I think it's very geographically determined. I think Illinois could be a flashpoint. The Oath Keepers are pretty active there, as are the 3%ers. What I would recommend, if at all possible, is try to get access to these guys' chat rooms and see what they're talking about. I did a piece recently for the Daily Beast about the prepper survivalists, because they're talking about like going out there in the streets. So, that's one area of chat rooms and forums. You can get on the Oath Keepers chat room. You can get onto. I think you have to pay to join, but I would try to monitor these guys in your area. Maybe, if you know who's active in your area, make contact with them now and ask them what they're planning to do.
Deborah, I saw your physical hand up, but not the computer hand.
Okay,
there you go.
Yes, okay. Yeah, I think that's a very good idea. You just said, did you say oak keepers?
The oath keepers, OATHKEEPERS. They're an organization. They claim they have 50,000 members. They probably don't. I mean, but they are former or current military and law enforcement. So these guys know how to use weaponry. They have personal arsenals. They may have professional access to arsenals. And they are super right wing. And they're basically a militia group. They're an anti-government militia group. They're probably the biggest group. Another one is the 3%ers. The thing about the 3%ers, they've been banned from Facebook and Twitter, so they're harder to monitor because you can't get access to their communications as easily. But the 3%ers are kind of like these informal groups of people throughout the whole country. And it could just be a Facebook group. It could just be like 5 guys that meet at a bar or whatever. But, you know, it's them, then the Boogaloo Boys, and the Proud Boys. I think those are the 4 groups you want to watch. So now, you know, you've got what 3 more weeks till the election. If there's any way, you know, and the thing about these guys is, despite the fact that they rail on like Trump about the fake media, they actually like media attention. And the way to get in with them is say, hey, look, you know, I really want to hear your point of view. Like, we haven't covered you up to now, and we feel that you really you have something important to say. And just try to make contact with them if you can, without giving them your personal emails and, you know, any way that they can find out where you live. And try to just say, hey, you know, I really want to know what your plans are. And, you know, can you let me know if you're going to have a demonstration? Because, you know, we want to be there to cover it so you can be heard. So that would be my approach with them. You know, just be, you know, just use the line that you want to hear what they have to say. So you're, in a way, you're validating them without supporting them. And then, you know, try to get access that way and find out what their plans are. Because they want the media there. They want to be filmed. I mean, they're creating problems because they want to be heard. And I'm not saying you should amplify their message and give them a microphone, but you want to know where they are right. And what they're planning in terms, so that you can plan your coverage accordingly. But yeah, Paris, you know, I don't think any of us really know what it's going to look like. We don't know the extent of it, but I think there is also a lot of hot air. And I hope so. But yeah, some people are really serious, like those wackos in Michigan. I mean, some of those people really are. And I think the closer you can get to them in order to gain access, you'll get a better sense of whether it's bluster or there's something really being organized. You know, the other thing is that if people get out and vote early and it's clear on election night who wins, there's going to be less of a chance of violence than if it's litigated in the courts for weeks and months afterwards. I think if there's a clear landslide victory, a lot of these people may not be as active and vocal as if it's murky and gray. But I'm not an expert on this.
Well, you know, we're winding down. So if you have a burning question, please try to get it in. Judith, can you talk a little bit about, and I alluded to it before, just dealing with, you know, the times that we're in. As a journalist, we're on the front lines, you know, telling the stories, you know, behind all this. What do you recommend for self-care, basically, in dealing with all this? Like I have flashbacks of, you know, seeing the cops and these protesters, you know, clashing. So do you have any advice in that regard? And then Jeff has a question after that.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an upsetting time. And I think for those of you who are news editors, keep reminding, every time you talk to your staff in the field, remind them that they're doing a really important work and that you really value what they're doing. I think oftentimes, you know, when we're assigning things, we kind of forget to, you know, we're so busy with the logistics, we forget to just pause and thank people. But I think, you know, what we have found is that—
my news director a note.
Okay. But I think, you know, one thing that we have found with psychological studies is people who feel that their work is valued and feel that they're making a difference will be more emotionally resilient in these very difficult situations. The other thing is, I think it's so important to take really good care of yourself. If there's something that you can do at the end of an 18-hour news day where you're just being good to yourself for an hour, If you can take days off at all possible, I think that's a discussion newsrooms should have right now about, and I know everybody's so understaffed at the moment, but if there's any way that you can plan ahead what could be the next 3 months and try to make sure that people get time off. And just whatever it is that helps you feel stronger, try to build it into every day. If it's, exercise is fantastic for releasing that adrenaline and that anxiety, and it's very good for combating depression. It helps you sleep better. Try not to drink so much or smoke so much weed. That can lower your resistance emotionally. I know, like, who am I to tell you? Like, I'm looking forward to my Zoom call at like
it's
5
legal
with my
here,
friends.
but I don't smoke. I don't smoke.
Yeah, but I mean, it does, look, it does, it can, if you're already depressed, it can add to depression if you're doing it outside moderation. And I think the most important thing is social support. I mean, it's one thing that helps emotional resiliency, it's connection with people. And if I think part of what's been so difficult for everybody during the last few months is that we're not all meeting in an office together. In a newsroom, we don't have that camaraderie. And as much as our coworkers, drive us up the wall, it's really important to connect. So again, if a newsroom, I don't know if you have like a weekly meeting, like almost like a Zoom cocktail type thing, but I think it's really important to, and again, this is another reason why I think having reporting buddies is really important, because you debrief together. Like, you're not going through it alone. You've been through this horrible experience with somebody and you check up on each other. So like, I have 2 close friends, aside from my husband, who's my best friend, but I have 2 close friends who I check in with about 3 times a day. And the 3 of us, we're like each other's support. And we've gotten each other through this thing. And I think just try to have a couple buddies, running buddies, who can get you through this. And the next few weeks are going to be really hard. You're not going to get a lot of rest. People are going to be really, you're going to be facing dangerous situations. You're going to be physically under stress. And I think try to pace your day so you've got a little window at the end of the day, and shut off the news. Don't look at your phone before you go to bed for an hour. Just shut that stuff off. I hope that helps.
It does. It does. Thanks.
Yeah.
Jeff?
Thank you. These are all great tips that we've heard today. Thank you. Although your self-care suggestions, I was planning exactly the opposite for the rest of the day,
okay.
but I'll make the revisions and I'll go on. One of the points you made that I thought was really, really useful, because you brought it up several times, is to talk with your newsroom supervisors about making plans for some of this, whether it's helping your staff of color decide what assignments they should take, whether it's putting together these reporting teams, which makes so much sense. And I just want to remind everybody that good relationships with news directors are not always easy. So turn to your union staff, turn to your shop stewards, turn to the people in your unit, get together on it and work on it together. Make those conversations happen one way or another. And if you need help doing it outside, turn to people in the union, because we have the broadcast steering committee. For public media people, we have a public media council for those working in mostly radio stations. Let's use those resources, because we have them and the members would like to support one another. And so if these conversations are difficult or not happening and you need them to happen in your newsroom, reach out to the union for some help. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff, for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's wonderful that you have a union, because so many news workers don't have a union. And I think, part of the tragedies of modern America is the assault on unions. So I think it's great you have one. One last thing, I don't know, and again, I know resources are so limited, but I don't know if it's possible for a newsroom to have a psychological professional, a therapist or a counselor, even a social worker on call. What you were describing, Vicki, it's such a common reaction, the flashbacks, well after the event, you're still troubled by it. That's like, it's so normal. That's a normal reaction to an abnormal event. And I don't know if it's possible to have somebody on call confidentially that people can reach out to. Sometimes all it takes is a couple phone calls or, you know, a couple video conferences, and then already you feel better. But I think, you know, if it's at all possible, if the union or a newsroom can, you know, have somebody, you know, a therapist.
I raised that early on in the pandemic with our management, and you know, we have the EA Employee Assistance Program, so that's pretty much where they directed us through intercom, the intercom stations.
Yeah.
It's not as immediate, I don't think, as having, you know, a number you can dial right away, but so maybe we will address that.
Yeah, or even if, you know, just a number and then you wait for the person to call you back or whatever. I mean, you know, if you feel upset by an assignment, it's not going to go away overnight. You know?
Right.
But, you know, I just want to say that I just really admire what everybody is doing at the moment. I mean, it's just incredibly important, and it's going to be even more important as we head into this extremely tumultuous phase. And I just want to reiterate what I said at the beginning. Please consider me a resource going forward. You know, Mary and Vicki, if you can share, you know, my email with folks, you know, I'm happy to serve as a resource. It's a difficult thing you're going through, and if I can help in any way with tip sheets or just, you know, finding you legal resources or whatnot, you know, please reach out. You know, we're here to help.
Well, thank you. Thank you for giving us your time today. This has been very enlightening. It's a very important topic, and I certainly got a lot out of it, and I hope everybody else that attended the workshop today got a lot out of it too. I see the high fives and thumbs up. So job well done, and yes, applause, applause, applause. So, thank you so much. And everybody that joined today, thank you for taking time out of your day to join us for this important discussion. So everybody have a great day.
Okay.
Thank you,
for
Vicki.
inviting me. Thank you.
Thank
Good
you,
luck.
Judith.
Good luck. Stay safe.
Yes, thank you.